Hi everyone, we're going to get started. Thanks for joining us today, and we welcome you to today's program, Resource Sharing ILL and Beyond. We're so glad that you're able to join us. I am Christine Brown, and I'm the Outreach Services Librarian for the South Central Regional Library Council. My pronouns are she, her. Co-hosting today is Sophie Friedman, the Member Services Librarian for CLRC. SCRLC and CLRC are co-hosting this program, and together we are two of the 9 multi-type library systems comprising the Empire State Library Network in New York State. SCRLC covers 14 predominantly rural counties encompassing 10,045 square miles and is headquartered in Ithaca, New York. CLRC covers 4 counties in central New York and includes Syracuse and the surrounding areas. Before we begin with the program, I do have a few announcements to make, program announcements, and then some housekeeping things. First, for the program announcement. Our second presenter today was Elise Thornley. Unfortunately, she let us know that she's not able to join us today for health reasons. And Greg Keel has graciously agreed to provide a short presentation on a similar topic. I'll be introducing him later. We do have Elisa's slides, so we will share those along with to everybody who is registered. For the housekeeping matters, all attendees are muted and will not be able to speak during the webinar. Attendees will have access to the chat and the Q&A features, and we ask that participatory information be added in the chat and questions be added in the Q&A, and we will be monitoring both. Captions are available and can be accessed by clicking on the Show Captions button. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be shared with all registrants in the next week or so. And we will share a link to an evaluation form in the chat, and we ask that you complete it at the end of the webinar. If you would like a certification of attendance, please let Sophie or I know, and we will make sure you get that. And all attendees are expected to follow the code of conduct, which will be added to the chat shortly. To summarize, please treat all staff, event attendees, and speakers with respect. Those not adhering to the code of conduct will be removed from the webinar. We will begin the afternoon with Melissa Lawson sharing her findings on burnout, followed by Greg Keel's presentation. And then there will be a break about 15 minutes after that. And then when we return from the break, we will hear from panelists Sarah Shank, Tora Loney, and Haley Mikolojak on trends in resource sharing. And after that panelist discussion, we will hear from Maria DeGaetano, who will provide information and updates on the Empire Library delivery. And we will end with some closing remarks. And now I will return the presentation over to Sophie, who will be introducing Melissa, our first speaker. Sophie?
Thank you for the opening remarks and for taking care of those housekeeping items, Christine. As Christine said, I'm Sophie Friedman, the co-host for this mini conference. My pronouns are she, her. I have been the Member Services Librarian at Central New York Library Resources Council since May 2024. And CLRC covers Herkimer, Madison, Oneida, and Onondaga counties. It is my honor to present to you our first keynote speaker, Melissa Lawson. Melissa, who uses she, they pronouns, is a reference librarian and coordinator for access services at Utica University. She graduated from University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2022 with her MLIS and from Merrimack College in 2020 with a bachelor's in English and philosophy. Melissa's work is driven by their passion for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and they are committed to ensuring that all individuals are represented in the objectives of their initiatives. Melissa will speak about unjust and inequitable instances in all areas and use their service to provide education and a voice to those who need it. They have also spent the last few years focusing on generative AI in educational spaces and how to grow within this field. In her spare time, Melissa is an avid yogi and spends 3 to 4 days a week at her local yoga studio. She spends every day working towards a balance of peace, joy, and work. Before I hand things over to Melissa, I want to note that there will be a few opportunities for active participation during her presentation, including an activity, which I know you'll all enjoy. As Christine mentioned, you can use the chat box for all participatory elements. Please add any questions that come up to the Q&A window. We will wait until the Q&A portion of the session at the end of Melissa's presentation to address questions. It will be easiest for us to get to your questions if you put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat. Without further ado, please enjoy Recharge, Transforming Burnout into Growth.
That's my bad. I didn't turn my mic on, but hello, everybody. So I'm very excited to get started. Just make sure my screen is shared. I appreciate everyone coming today. So as Sophie said, there will be opportunity for you to participate, and I do enjoy participation, and I hope that you will get multiple things out of it. And I also have all of my references at the end of my slides, and any additional references or more information you would like, I can provide with my email contact, so you can just email me. So getting started, I just wanted to go over an agenda, just kind of get an instance of what we'll be looking at today. So just going over what burnout is, what people are saying, where your roles may be in your particular field, whether you're a colleague, whether you have some manager responsibilities, how to reconstruct our perception. So a lot of times when we hear burnout, we have associations with them, and that can be good, bad, that could be misinformation that we're not aware of, that can be so many things. So just kind of figuring out how we can change our structures. And then experiencing burnout, I have some librarians participating that I have quotes from. I have shares, and we'll go over that. I did a survey as well that I sent across the US that we'll talk about into, and then just where do we go from here? So obviously I am giving you tools and stuff. So where do we go? How can it be helpful? What can you take away from it? So first, I like to do a little breathing exercise. And also because I'm an avid multitasker, having this little circle kind of heals it a little bit. So basically, something that's really good with breath work is following the circle. So you breathe in, and then you breathe out. So if everyone wants to take a second to do it on their own, so you breathe in and breathe out. This is kind of a lot of stuff to talk about, so I always like to give everybody a chance. Now, going over that, I do like to inform what this presentation is not. So unfortunately, this is not a cure for depression or a fix for workplace burnout. I do not have that capability, nor do I feel I am qualified to have that capability. It is also not negating the experiences of people with mental illness. So burnout and mental illness do go hand in hand, and a lot of times definitions can get confusing. So I am not trying to limit and subject mental illness to something small and something that's a presentation only and can be fixed. And this is also not a sales pitch for trying yoga, journaling, meditation, or breathwork like I just did. What it is it's meant to challenge misinformation and quick solutions we often see not only in our workplace, but in social media, in our academic papers. And it's also meant to be shareable to colleagues, staff members, and anyone else you feel could really benefit from this. So first little activity that I'd like everyone to do is, what do you think of when you hear the word burnout? What are some terms that you associate with it? And I'll give everyone a couple seconds to kind of flood the chat with words that they think of when they hear burnout. Yeah, so we're already seeing like a lot of similar ideas of overwhelmed, exhaustion, frustration. So I have a couple on there as well. So we have, yeah. We like that it brought me all the way back to the very last page. That's okay. But yeah, keep going while my computer tries to figure itself out. Yeah, so overwhelmed, unfocused, stressed out, those different abilities, those are different things that we'll see. And there are other associations that maybe not everyone thinks of when we're thinking of burnout. I do like people who put irritability, drained, cranky. I think those are really good terms that people tend to forget as well. And now we're back to a working presentation. Yay. So yeah, exhaustion, fatigue, depression, stress, we have breakdown, isolation is very good. Cynicism is, I think, one people tend to not say as much, but cynicism is a big one. We have unmotivated, overworked, disengagement, isolation. There are so many. So, right. So why do I have you do this word association? I think it's really important that we have kind of the connotations we already have so we can get to that perception. So where does it come from? So burnout is a term you hear now. I mean, I hear it every day on my social media page. I don't know if my For You page is trying to tell me something or not, but I hear it a lot there. So where does it come from? So we do have from 1974 a paper that is specifically talking about staff burnout. Now, burnout did exist before this, but this is where we're starting to see the associations with staff burnout. And it's being defined as emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, decrease in sense of accomplishment, which manifests symptomatically between person to person. And that's important to recognize because we're going to be talking about the different symptoms of burnout, but not everyone's going to feel this. So isolation might be something a lot of people feel, but if one person who's experiencing burnout doesn't feel isolation, that doesn't necessarily mean their burnout is less or not as valuable as others, right? Other things. So obviously when we talk about burnout, we talk about stress because burnout is brought on by chronic stress. So the National Institute of Health defines stress at work can cause physical and mental symptoms. So whether it be something like being under pressure all the time, having conflicts, constantly overworked, there can also be exhaustion, there can be stomach issues, there can be colds that are easily obtainable from being stressed and burnt out so bad. So knowing that it doesn't only appear in mental symptoms, it can be physical and social as well. And obviously there are three key dimensions that we talk about with burnout, which is overwhelming exhaustion, feelings of cynicism, attachment to the job, and this sense of lack of accomplishment, which is big. And we also know that burnout now does not specifically focus on the job only. So there's caregiver burnout, there's academic, there's work-related, there's parental. We're now more defining burnout. So there are so many more categories it can be and not just an overall term. One thing I like to point out is burnout, like a lot of things, is in a cycle. So when we have burnout, we have this huge cycle of phases. First starts with the honeymoon phase. It's like maybe when you first get into your job, it could be, you know, even in your like 30th year of librarianship, you're still in that like honeymoon phase maybe, or you're in a new career or a new job task. This is when, you know, your high energy, strong desire to succeed, positive outlook, focusing on learning and growing. And then it moves to that onset stress. So we have the increased workload. We can have unrealistic expectations, whether that's your own perception or the perception of a manager, colleague, patrons. We have the growing pressure. This is where we're seeing those early signs of fatigue and difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping. With onset stress and chronic stress, a lot of times people will assume that it is an internal thing, so none of the outside factors included. So they may go to a doctor and only focus on those things, and they're ignoring a piece that's coming from, like the call is coming from within the house, it's within your workspace, but they don't see that. Then we're getting chronic stress, which is this is where we're getting emotional exhaustion, cynicism, lack of motivation, detachment, apathy. We're now doing these tasks. So, you know, as an access services librarian, I have an extra task of doing the social media for our job. And at one point, I decided that, wow, that's really not part of my job, and I have a lack of motivation to continue to do it. That's what we're seeing, that detachment, that apathy. We're also seeing physical and mental issues. Again, feeling sick, maybe having to be out because we have chronic headaches, chronic migraines, those kind of things, which then leads to burnout, which is the complete exhaustion. So before, we're seeing like starting emotional exhaustion, and then it's complete. Everything's kind of in fight or flight mode, shutting down. So feelings of hopelessness, difficulty then doing your daily functions, things that you were able to do before, you can't even do that. Which then leads into what I call a recovery period, which we put in quotations because it's often incomplete, and it's often just kind of there as what we see from managers. So it's a temporary relief from burnout, often taking just one mental health day. Oh, if I take this day off, maybe it'll fix me. Or, oh, if I just take this yoga class, like maybe it'll fix me. It's limited or no changes to the underlying causes of burnout. So you're not changing anything about your work environment. You're changing things that are small, which then you're returning to the same environment and stressors. And then what you have is all the way back, but now the honeymoon phase is a relapse phase. So everything that you're feeling before is now with this underlying cynicism and burnout. So it's a difficulty to maintain the recovery, increased vulnerability, and then potential for more severe burnout episodes. So other important terms. So again, I'm giving you a ton of information, but other things is, so it is not depression. It is similar to depression, but depression, you have things where, maybe you can be prescribed a certain SSRI, or you can deal with therapy on a regular basis. Burnout tends to be about specific demands, maybe job related, maybe caregiver, maybe academic. So we want to make sure those are separate, because while they're in the same category, it's not our job to diagnose someone with depression or even diagnose them with burnout, but treating it like the exact same thing does get into muddy waters and is also not giving them what they need. Other things is toxic positivity. I'm sure people have either heard of this or dealt with this, where we see dysfunctional emotional management without acknowledging emotions. So there's either two categories of that. There are people who are doing it intentionally, who are saying, well, if I give them a pizza party, or if I give them a $5 Dunkin' gift card, they'll be fine for now. And then I don't have to do anything for a while. Or there are people who are genuinely trying, but because of previous examples of people they've worked with, they don't know what they're doing. So they're being toxic without knowing it. So that's really important in terms of burnout, because if you're getting support and you're getting it in this toxic positive environment, it's not going to help you. You're going to go to that relapse phase. And then I always throw in quiet quitting, because like other things, I do look at social media a lot in terms of where burnout is growing and where things like quiet quitting are growing. So it originated as a term for doing the basic requirements of your job, whereas now I think a lot of people put a negative spin on it because they think younger generations don't want to do work, but it's saying, no, we don't want to do work beyond our roles while also being not compensated well, or not rewarded well, or not recognized well. And I think those are really important terms to notice, because it's, again, in that burnout cycle, it's trying to do things in burnout where you can only do the main part of your job because that's all you feel able to do. So perceptions. So I like to include a variety of perceptions. The first one is the World Health Organization. So this is something from 2019 that they continue to stand by and have not made any corrections to as of yesterday when I looked again. But it's burnout being resulting from chronic workplace stress, but should not be applied to other experiences of life, which we now know that's necessarily not true. We're seeing academic versions, which some people can consider a job. Same with caregiver, parent. Those are all can be considered jobs, but breaking them up does recognize the difference between them. We also have an influencer I found that I thought was very interesting when I was looking at burnout on social media. And he says, burnout is fake. I wasn't burnt out. I just gave up on my purpose, which I think is interesting because not only is that telling people, oh, okay, my burnout is fake. Maybe I just have to, give up on my purpose. It's also showing people who don't experience burnout, okay, maybe they're all just faking it. So like, obviously that can be a negative influence. And then we also see, I don't really believe in burnout. A lot of people work hard for decades and decades, like Winston Churchill and Einstein. This is from the former Yahoo CEO, which is, again, a very interesting thing because I don't know that Winston Churchill or Einstein were burnt out because I was not alive when they were there. And we don't know that she is not burnt out in her own way. But she doesn't maybe want to recognize it. Maybe it's something generational, the idea of keeping things in rather than exploring them. We don't know. But again, that's still a perception that has been made clear to people in her staff. Imagine being underneath this person who you might be burnt out, but she's telling you, I don't believe in burnout, so I can't acknowledge your feelings. And we do also have a psychiatrist here that talks about the problem with burnout is the lack of definition, and it's not a reliable diagnosis, and nobody really owns it, which is very true, but I think that can work in favors. Like I said before, we're constantly growing where burnout comes from. So academic, caregiver, parental, there's so many more, athletic, there's autistic burnout, there's so many terms. So yes, there is a lack of definition, but at the same time, that's kind of good because just like mental health, burnout isn't shaped the same way for everyone. You can't say how a 95-year-old man could experience burnout versus like a 21-year-old female. Like those are very different people with very different life experiences. So another thing I like to point out, burnout is not laziness. It's not on purpose. It's not a way of getting out of work. And it is not for a particular group of people. A lot of times, and I hate to have to keep pointing out social media, but obviously social media is a huge influence, not only on us, but generations coming into that academic force. Younger and younger are trying to fight burnout in their jobs, and people are seeing it as, well, you don't want to work anymore. Well, that's not necessarily true, right? It's not that, someone like me doesn't want to work anymore. It's that I don't want to like not be able to move for days at a time. And so all of those things are kind of important to recognize. So knowing that it's not, and if you know anyone that experiences this, tell them like, we know it's not laziness. I know you're not doing this on purpose. So why does it matter? So a couple of reasons, and this goes for managers and for colleagues because they have that influence. So saying your manager has more importance and more impact on your mental health than a doctor or therapist. There's a study that was done to focus on mental health and the relationships that people have in the workforce. And this study talked about managers have just as much impact on a person's mental health as their spouse, which is 69%, whereas their doctor's impact is 51% and 41%. And that's huge because now you're seeing, okay, your manager is having that much impact on your mental health. So what environment are they creating? If the doctors and therapists who are trying to help you aren't giving you as much of an impact, then maybe what your manager is doing is actually increasing more of that burnout. So different things to look. So to do another participation, I would like to show you the circles of influence. And if people have never seen this before, I am happy to introduce it. So it is the idea that there are 3 different circles. There's the smallest circle, so that is what we can directly control or impact through thoughts, words, and actions. In the outer circle, you have concerns that we can do something about, but we maybe not have control over the outcome, but we can influence those around us. And then the last is the circle concern, which we all have concerns for, but we cannot control. So there maybe are things in the upper world, we think politics, we think, big decisions and money making, maybe we don't have those options in control, but what things can influence us and what things can control us. So these 2 questions here, I'd like you to let me know, what do you think you can directly control, and what do you think you can influence in your current position and day to day? What are some things that in our current position as a person, what can you do in your life? If you're a manager or a colleague, what can you do to impact your thoughts, words, and actions, or influence people? Put that in the chat and we can kind of talk more about it. So maybe directly, we have some people taking breaks, walking around, choosing what task you feel like doing, trying to exercise, our attitude. Walking in good weather is my favorite thing. Of course, with the snow around here, does not make me happy, but we'll see. Hopefully we'll get a better spring. Yes, music. You can't control how someone can react to something. That's very important. We do have the influence, I think, as well, of how we react to other people. So if we influence those around us, we get back to that cynicism. So if you are experiencing burnout, or the person you are experiencing burnout is one of your colleagues, talking together, you kind of have that influence of control, the circle of influence of that conversation. So yeah, having empathy and patience with coworkers is huge. Sleep is always great. I do recommend sleep as much as you can. So you can take time. So those are things that we directly control. Influences how we talk to people. You know, being nice to somebody, also having the recognition to know that the way we speak to coworkers, the way we speak to employees, those are different things that are influential. And we might not know it. You don't know what influence you have on a person unless like they directly tell you. You may not realize that many of your colleagues looked up to you. You may not realize your manager even might look to you for a lot of things, and listen to the words that you're saying. And obviously, like, no one's asking you to be like perfect all the time. That's crazy. What it does mean though is like speaking about things like, hey, I've noticed that we've been kind of stressed as a group today. Like, what's going on? Just being comfortable with those kind of conversations. Yeah, so someone saying giving the staff autonomy to develop their workflows, that's really awesome. That's something I do as a staff a manager of staff. I have 4 full-time employees and 3 part-time, and that's something that open communication and just making sure that, you know, knowing that a health emergency, a mental health day, something like that is something that I'm not going to be like, no, you have to come in. It can always be worked around. And the same goes for coworkers. We kind of know. So yeah, those are all really good things. So obviously, I've been talking at you with my thoughts and a little lit review of what I have been researching. So it is good to get other people's opinions. So hearing directly from librarians, and in 2024, I had a study that I had sent out to the US librarians through like different forums to focus on early career librarians. And that was not only because I am an early career librarian, but also because I was seeing a lot of gaps in research when I was looking for burnout. There was just not many associated definitions. There was a lot for mid-career and later career librarians. And I was just noticing, okay, but what about the people we're bringing on? What's making them burned out? Is it something academically that maybe we can focus on? Is it when they come into work? Is it the job themselves? Like, how can we change that? And I think it's really important because, like, in my library schooling, they talked a lot about library being a career-changing kind of field where we have people coming in and wanting to. And we don't want that to be the opposite, where people change out so early in their career. So I surveyed librarians who had 7 years or fewer experience. That's because after looking at hundreds of definitions that were so vague, I had to figure out a number. We had one that said a mid-career librarian is 8 to 15 years. and has worked for their current employer for over 5 years. So what I decided to do is just do 7 years or fewer experience to understand the challenges and opportunities that librarians have in their early careers. So I had 60 lovely participants who were willing to share their stories, their frustrations, their highlights. And I just wanted to show here that we did have a lot of ranges of when they graduated with their MLIS or MLS. And this is important because many of the people before 2020 didn't necessarily get jobs right away. Even other people in the 2023, 2022, other categories didn't necessarily get a job until a year or a couple of years after. So they were included in the 7 or less years experience. So as we can see, most of the people who had been working as a full-time librarian were between 1 to 3 years. That was the biggest chunk, between being 30 and 23% of them, which I think is really great. So we're getting those first right out the gate. This is their first job, most likely their first full-time job out of librarianship. And what was really important to me, I'd be happy to share more of my results with anybody, but I wanted to pull some quotes from the participants because I think that was really important. So the first one, I feel as a librarian, they aren't valued in their perspectives of other faculty members outside of my department. Staffing is a major issue. We've never been fully staffed, so I have to take on a lot more responsibility. It's a difficult time to be a librarian. This profession has cultivated a lot of toxicity and has difficulty expelling workers who are toxic. I had to be trained by my colleagues because our dean was checked out, which is sad. Another sad one is I just feel hopeless. I feel I'm not good enough to work in the field. And I think there's an issue of disengaged and ineffective leadership in academic libraries. So we have many leaders with no real managerial skills. And we need leaders who are still putting librarians first. I think someone in the comments, I didn't see your name, I'm so sorry, did talk about early career librarians who are BIPOC, which I think is such a huge part. And my next step is going forward and doing that research specifically for those groups because of how many librarians in the field are people of color. I think that's really important, as well as talking about gender, whether male, female, trans, non-binary, all different other perspectives. I think that's really important as a diversity part, because that's also talking about inequity when hiring. That's talking about how we're receiving perceptions. Maybe they have insights that we don't have. Those are all really good things as well. And these quotes specifically, I have more quotes, but these are just talking about how difficult it is currently in the field and feeling like they're doing everything on their own. We have people who are not being trained properly. We have people who are doing the work of probably a full-time staff. And then the other kind of things are where they see could be improvements. So leaders need to find a way to support staff, not that make them feel like they're underperforming when they're already overwhelmed and with responsibilities. And that's a huge part of burnout. Burnout is not just being overworked, but it's also being under challenged, which is a huge part. So giving a lot of work that might not necessarily be fulfilling them, or just not having a lot of work and throwing so many things at them that are not really within what they want to do. There's also leadership management can make or break a librarian's new career. So having a good leader is obviously what we're all looking for. Mentorship programs is a must for new librarians. And I also think it's a must for librarians in general. I think a lot of times there's a stigma in work with a new librarian versus a seasoned one. I think the mentorship can work both ways. People who are just getting out of librarian school can share kind of what they're talking about with somebody who's maybe been in that job for 15 years and have this really good cultivating conversation of what the perspectives are. So I like to say mentorship goes both ways. And then I had to include this very long quote that I won't read all of, but is super important. And I think it applies not only to public, but academic as well. So librarians are expected to be by the public and government, information experts, teachers, tutors, therapists, social workers, medical advisors, summer camp counselors, researchers, archivists, legal assistants, historians, insurance experts, technology wizards, so much more. But we're not staffed, paid, or supported enough to hit the bare minimum of our job expectations, which again goes back to, if we have all of this work and we're doing all this work, we're feeling so overwhelmed and not even getting any recognition for it, not getting any help for it. We're just kind of being made to, here, swim for yourself, being pushed in and kind of struggling there. So what do they need? Obviously, I've mentioned a couple things already. They've mentioned a couple things in the quotes, but what do they need from this? And some of these things, as I go over it, obviously are not applicable everywhere. So compensation is a huge one, and I always put it first because, of course, everyone would like to get paid well, myself included. I would like to get paid, but obviously that's not always up to middle managers or even higher managers, depending on their expectations. Other things can be policies, maybe if there's not policies or their policies are outdated or old. There is development, so professional development, development within the different staffing. All of those things are super important. Oh, whoops. Technology is not my friend today. Here we go. That's all right. We're growing together. So other things besides development, mentorship, that's a huge one. So I tried to make the ones that were like their biggest concerns bigger. But if that's not recognizable to everyone, that's okay. These are all important. Respect, that was a huge thing mentioned, was just the respect of, I am doing this job, whether or not manager, colleague, patron sees the importance, it is important and they deserve respect. Support, huge thing. Boundaries, those are really important. Staffing, again, it's not everybody's responsibility for staffing. It also can be tough with different job opportunities, how much they're willing to put up as a starting pay, so many other things that they don't control. Communication is huge, recognition is huge, leadership and honesty. Those are things that they're asking for day to day. They're not asking for huge changes, big chunks of things. So when thinking about that in terms of what they need, what do you need? So just like we are looking to support colleagues, we also need that support, whether it's something on the list that I had mentioned before or something not mentioned. What do you need in your support for your own journey? So I'm asking you guys to comment in the chat what you might need for your own journey. I think it's important that we recognize and maybe give people ideas if they don't know what they need. Sometimes that's really tough. You can mention things that I've already mentioned, anything that you want to in the chat. Yeah, so stability is a huge one. Is there anything other people may think? Motivation, clear expectations, positive feedback, telling me when I'm doing something correct so I can keep doing it. That's important, not just saying, you know, some people have bosses that say, oh, I haven't heard anything, so that's good, but that's not the kind of feedback we're looking for. Recognizing their abilities, feedback, cultural humility, assessments, clear expectations, define roles. Yep. Understanding that they're a whole person and not just an employee. I think that's really important. It's going beyond the idea that your whole life is your job. It's actually your whole life is your whole life. And you also have a job. And I think those are important things to recognize as we see coming up in not only academic conversations, but social conversations, instructional and infrastructure. Those are huge things. So respect for their contributions and expertise. Just because someone, depending on if they're mid-career, late career, early career, their contributions and expertise should be valued. Everyone here had to do a lot to get to where they are, and that is so important. Flexibility, respect for capabilities, having my back, that's so important. Having a boss that's not only knowing what you're doing, but treating you that way and treating you like they have that support is huge, because you don't want to do something and then feel that your manager's not there. Treated like a professional, not a secretary. All of these are so important, and I thank you so much for putting them in the chat. So thinking about that in your own instances. So whether, you're talking to your manager and saying, hey, I listened to this conversation, we should be having these conversations, because I'm seeing that all of these things are not happening in our workplace. And that can be a tough conversation to have. But for me personally, I have done it with my manager, and I'm glad that I said it rather than not saying it, because even if it took some tough ways to get where we are now with work-life balance, it was still, I'm making the conversation not only for me, but for my staff, for my colleagues, and for anyone who comes after me. So I think that's really important. So another thing really quick is, what treatments were you recommended? So I say this as we're now talking about the solution. So in terms of, so I mentioned before that I am a yoga enthusiast, meaning I go to yoga all the time. I was actually recommended yoga for my burnout. So what other things have you maybe been recommended by higher ups, by bosses, maybe by colleagues, if you've seen programs within your institution? What things have you been maybe recommended? I think is important to talk about. Yeah, so taking advantage of work from home and flexible work policy, that's good. Deep breathing, yep, as I did at the beginning, which was on purpose to do deep breathing. Yep, taking a break from lunch to get away from your desk. PTO, meditation, and all of these things are so valid to do. But we're going to talk about maybe why those are quick solutions and not the solution. So taking time out of your day to exercise, doing it on your lunch break, that makes me sad to hear that, but yes. Hopefully, unionizing, making time to do something that I want to do, not what you have to do, that's also great. So when we look at these solutions, and you can keep talking in the chat about different solutions, I like to put them up so people can recognize, like, oh, maybe I haven't tried that. That's something I can do on my own. But we're seeing things that weren't mentioned, like journaling. I have been recommended journaling. Mindfulness, it's where you get meditation, deep breathing, seeking familial support, that's talking to people. We have seeking professional help, whether that's a therapist, a doctor. Setting boundaries, that's something like going outside for your lunch, not having lunch at your desk, doing things, exercising or eating healthy. And all of those are under this big umbrella of self-care. And the reason I mention it is because of one important common denominator. These are individual actions, which puts the responsibility of you as a worker, which is not necessarily fair if burnout is coming from within the house. So if you are burnt out because of your job, you're making it these different solutions, whether it's yoga, breathing, taking a break and going outside. Like, all those things are making the problem only with the person, not with the infrastructure as all. So a couple of things I'll mention to help will be things similarly, but setting as a standard practice and not being like, okay, you're stressed, you should go exercise during your break, because that's not fair. You're already doing all this work of people without having the staff or without having the support or the recognition. And then now I have to go do an extra job, my 5 to 9 from my 9 to 5, of figuring out how to give myself self-care so I can fix myself to then go back to work. That's way too much responsibility. And that's not fair to anybody, because it's giving you another job. It's, okay, here's another job that we're not going to tell you is a job, and we're going to put it on top of your plate. So you have to go do the self-care stuff. So what do we know? We know that burnout is not a cohesive definition across disciplines. Burnout can happen as early as their first year of librarianship. Manager and colleagues are obviously not the only factor, but they should be a part of the solutions and not place them on the individual. And mentorships are crucial for new librarians. And everyone else as well. So where can we grow from here? How do we support our colleagues and staff? So the first thing is listening to their needs, and this could be workload related. It can be flex work, remote work, delegation of duties, pay if that's an option, getting more staff if that's an option. Again, in this current climate, I don't know how much that's a possibility, and that is very unfortunate. But what ways is you as a colleague or a manager can talk to your staff about it? What are they needing? Now, again, flex work, remote work, all those things are not going to instantly fix it, but you need to listen to their needs and your own needs and resist the urge to interrupt or offer a quick solution. Because going back to the quick solutions of self-care, it's then putting that responsibility back on the individual only. You need to also take some of it if it is burnout within your workspace. So validate their feelings. It's saying it's understandable you feel this way, not I understand how you feel. When we talk as humans in human interaction, there is usually an underlying, oh, I heard you say thing. I am going to say related thing because I think it will help this conversation, which is not inherently bad, but it's something that we naturally do. However, if you're already burnt out and you're telling somebody like, I'm really struggling, like I'm burnt out, like yesterday I couldn't even finish my tasks, and someone's like, I understand how you feel, blah, 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 this happened to me. It's then taking away any of the, not necessarily responsibility, but it's taking any of the talking and any of the conversation away from them. It's not listening to their needs. It's having more of a conversation about needs in general, which is not what everybody needs. Saying it's understandable you feel this, you're feeling this way, is acknowledging that their burnout is legitimate, it is real, and it is something that needs to be talked about. Other things, regular check-ins, asking your staff or colleagues and yourself, what can I do to support you? How do I address a toxic behavior promptly and effectively? What are things that can be done? Yes, you're going through similar feelings, but you should not pull focus and focus on, okay, this staff member is having a hard time. Well, they're doing 12 tasks and my other staff member is doing 4 tasks. Can we switch it out? Can we have staff development? Can we help and get things together? Can we kind of talk about what the workload looks like? What are we doing to kind of have this communication together? And communication is huge. And lastly, recognize and reward. Public recognitions and rewarding employee contributions. Show appreciation for their hard work and dedication. And I say publicly because you can do it privately, but many a times public recognition lets you know that you are telling other people about it. So whether it's like a kudos or saying in a staff meeting, I want to recognize Melissa because she did this display this month for Black History Month and it got all over the different social medias we have for the college. It, brought a lot of people in and I'm grateful for that. Something like that is acknowledging. And in acknowledgement and reward, being specific, saying you're doing a great job doesn't acknowledge anything. It's good to hear that you're doing a great job, but about what? Letting somebody know that you are paying attention to what they're doing is huge. So if I hear something from a boss like, you're doing a great job, and I go back, well, what specifically? And he doesn't have an answer. Well, that makes me feel like, does he think I'm doing a good job or is he saying what I want to hear? Which is not helpful because just hearing a blank statement of good job, but I'm not paying attention feels undervalued in your work. It's I'm doing all these crazy things and no one's taking notice. So I always say be specific when it comes to those because it shows that you care and that you're listening. And empathize, that is a huge thing. And our big activity that is going to happen, the big thing that is going to happen is this little activity that I have everybody do. So I don't know how many people know about the spoon theory, but the spoon theory is something that in 2003 was created to describe chronic illness, describing the amount of physical or mental energy someone has available in their daily activities, tasks, or limitations. So basically you are given a set amount of spoons that you have, and what you have to do is figure out, okay, how many things does taking a shower or washing the dishes or getting to work, how much does that cost me? So I'm going to have everybody kind of take a couple of minutes, like, 3 to 5 minutes to kind of explore this game. I'm going to put it in the chat as soon as I can figure out where everything went. So you will see the outline of the presentation, but I will be putting it in the chat for everyone, and we will click on it together. Let's see if you can still see my screen. Perfect. So basically, I'm asking everyone to take a look. So obviously this is, something that does look a little older, but instead of me asking questions, I want questions to kind of be for the Q&A part at the end. So just have a second, maybe play a couple of these rounds. So you click on it and you're being asked to do different tasks based on the amount of spoons you have. That's the whole thing. You have a collection of spoons. So I want everyone to take like 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, and I'll have my little timer up here to do that. And we'll go over something in the questions round, and then I'll kind of give you a wrap up, and then we'll be able to take some questions. So you can start now if you haven't already started. Also, feel free to share anything in the chat that you've noticed as you're going along with this game. I think that's really important. Put my little timer up here. Oh, there it is. Oh, I didn't know it made noise, sorry. And as you are doing this, I'm going to talk a little bit about the ending part, which is where we go from here. So in this activity, basically what we want to look for is empathy. So we have to treat it as, obviously this was originally made for people with chronic illnesses, but it can be applied today for ourselves as well as others for our burnout experiences, and seeing how our normal activities when we have burnout, how that affects them. So your normal daily tasks, if you already feel overwhelmed, maybe seeing that it's a balancing game. How can you do that with your staff? How can you do that with your colleagues? How can you do that with yourself? Because again, as we talk about the circle of influence, you are not sure of who you necessarily influence unless they are directly saying it. So if someone else notices you're burnt out and you kind of give up, they might give up. You never know what you have, so you have to take care of everyone and yourself. It's always like that analogy of like putting your mask over yourself before your children, which is a very weird analogy for me, but the same thing, having that kind of taking care of yourself as well as others. So if it'll let me go forward. Oh, cool, the timer stays up there. New things I learned. So in terms of where do we go from here, there are 3 things that maybe you can do as a takeaway this week to grow more in your burnout. So scheduling a check-in with a colleague or staff member. It can be someone you're very close to. That way it's easier. It can be someone that maybe you haven't talked to in a while and you want to see how they're doing. Just talk with them and see maybe what they need, going back to what they need, listening and validating their feelings. Review your own workload and identify areas of delegation or prioritization. So if you are struggling and maybe there's ways you can delegate, okay, I have these 12 tasks, but actually 2 of them can be done by a staff worker who's already doing the same partial work and it won't overwhelm her. So doing it that way, and also exploring the resources of burnout that I've shared, not my own little selfish plug here, but obviously I have a lot of articles, some short, some long, just different ways of talking about burnout. Small actions can make a big difference. So obviously change does not happen overnight, but every small step we make towards addressing burnout is a step in the right direction. So if we keep conversations going, we stay committed to positive change, it creates a workplace where everyone is valued and supported. Obviously, again, positive change does not happen overnight, and being positive just because you feel like you have to is not necessarily what we're asking for here. It's just having that, okay, let's work together. Let's have this positive change. Let's try things. Because if you don't try, it'll stay the same. But making small changes, whether or not it's doing a group walk at lunch, something like that, just to get started. And then you can have conversations from there. And then I have my very long reference pages, which will obviously be given to you as well. So that is it for my part of the presentation. And then if we have questions, I don't see the Q&A, so I don't know.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melissa. And we do have one question. So first of all, I just wanted to say thanks for the engaging and insightful presentation. And the one question that we do have is, did you find the impact on new legislation affected the way librarians feel about the job? And I know that this study is not super recent. So you might just answer like what you would imagine to happen, or if you've had any conversations with anyone since the new administration took over.
Yeah, I think going back, obviously, like there were some things that talked about more than just obviously the internal stuff, but the external, where it's like I'm a public librarian and there's funding within some things, and now I've had funding pulled, things that were happening before. And obviously that does impact, and it does impact the idea of whether or not you're public, special, academic, all the different types of librarians, you're still with the public. There's going to be public patrons, there's going to be students who become, your patrons, all that stuff. So it does make it harder to address things. I always say like an open conversation is what I've found in not only talking to people, but in the research and the survey the most helpful, because again, you can't start somewhere if you're all really quiet about everything. And it's hard to have those conversations. And obviously you have to take everything some people say with a grain of salt, but I always recommend that maybe have those conversations. You might learn something or assume something you didn't know.
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks for answering that question, and thanks to our participant for the question. If you have questions that have come up in the last few minutes, or if other questions pop up later, you can reach out to Melissa directly after the conference. I will pop her contact information into the chat box. We'll also be sharing a link to Melissa's slides at the end of the conference. And thank you again, Melissa, for being here and giving your awesome keynote address. We so appreciate you sharing your time, energy, and expertise with us all. And that activity was really fun at the end, and a really important thing, I think, for all of us to go through all three of the activities there. So
Yeah.
I know I wasn't able to do it right now, but I'm going to save it and do it later. It's going to be in our resources at the end of the presentation. And I'll also drop that in the chat as well.
I do want to mention someone did just put it up as you were doing the ending talk. So I do want to address their question, if you
Sure.
don't mind.
Thank you for noticing.
Yeah. So someone said you mentioned delegation to colleagues, but if one source of your burnout is your colleagues doing the same to you, what would you recommend instead? You don't want to contribute to everyone else's burnout. That is something that I actually struggled with a lot, and I currently have a new system, and it's different from everyone, but when it comes to delegation, one of the things I have now decided to do is it's almost like in the same wheel of what you can control. It's almost the same of like, what is my actual job description? What do I need to get done? So in that very small circle, what do I need to get done to like actually function in my role? And a lot of times you think it's everything, but it's actually not. So like access services, I have to make sure my staff are coming into work. I have to make sure I'm approving their timesheets. I have to make sure, that people come in and check out books correctly. I have to make sure ILL is working, but like beyond that, that's my job as an access services librarian. When it's a reference, it's a little outside, the influences that I have. And then the big things are like things that I've taken on or people are asked me to take on. And so you kind of like prioritize a list. I also say that I have something really important on my wall, which is how I interact with colleagues now. And it's a little battery and it says, "This is my social battery. Please, talk to me accordingly." So at the very top, it's like, "I'm in the best mood ever. Come chat with me. Come give me more stuff to do." You know what I mean? And at the very end, it's like, "Do not talk to me, only email me." And it's kind of that scale. And it's, at first everyone was like, in my job was kind of like, "Oh, it's a little silly." But I was like, I need it for my needs. Like, I need you to know that I cannot handle any more extra stuff right now, and you need to respect that. So it's a great way to communicate without having to like have that in-person conversation. I'm like, if you can't read my door, then like go out and come back in after you've read it. Like, so I have this huge thing. So I think that's really important. And I hope that can help with some of the colleague stuff as well. Just recognizing that, hey, we're all people. So yeah,
Thank
thank
you so
you.
much for taking the time to answer that additional question, Melissa,
Yeah.
and for seeing it. And I love that idea of putting the social battery up in your office somewhere, because one thing that contributes to burnout for me is actually having to explain where I'm at to other people
Yeah.
and explain how burnt out I'm feeling. So I think that's a
Yeah.
great solution.
Yeah, it's basically just a like different emojis, like a smiley face, a meh face, a frowny face, and then I go into descriptors of what the person can do when they see each face. And every day I change it. Like today is "Do not talk to me because I'm doing something." So no one will come in and knock during this time.
I
So
love that. It's
yeah.
respectful, but it's
Yeah.
firm.
And
Good
there's
to have
always a
those
please in there.
boundaries.
So,
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you again so much. And I'm going to pass things over to Christine, who's going to introduce our second keynote speaker.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you, Melissa, for an excellent presentation. A lot there, and I am going to try out the spoons later as well. Thank you. And now I am going to introduce our next speaker. For those of you who weren't here at the beginning of the mini conference, we did have a change in our scheduling, our program. Elise Thornley was scheduled to present at this time, and unfortunately, she let us know that she's not able to join us today for health reasons. So we reached out to Greg Keel, who we just reached out to him yesterday afternoon, and he agreed to do a similar presentation to what Elise was going to do for us. And so now I am going to introduce Greg Keel and thank him profusely for joining us at such last notice and giving a presentation to us. Thank you, Greg. Greg Keel is the library director at Tompkins Cortland Community College. Throughout his nearly 25-year career, he has been deeply involved with and expanding and enhancing the resource sharing landscape between library communities. He began his career in 2000 as a special librarian for IBM in Poughkeepsie, New York, and in 2004 he accepted the position in SUNY Cobleskill as their access services librarian, and then in 2008 he was offered the position of library director at Tompkins Cortland Community College, where he currently is working. And so now I turn it over to Greg. Once again, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Hi, everybody. I guess I would be in the category of later career librarian. So since 2000, and I've done everything except the public sector. So maybe I'm planning to retire maybe in 2 years and then still keep my hand in stuff. So maybe I'll explore the public sector too. But anyway, I do have a few slides to go over. It's a combination of BARC request process, which is resource sharing, which is kind of my thing, and workflows, which ties into what the original presentation was going to be. So it's a little bit of both there. I did see some familiar faces in the attendance for here. So if this is a repeat, near the end, you get to explore a little about how the BARC process works, so it helps you get a better understanding of things. So I'm going to try to share my screen. It's been since COVID since I've done this, but let's see what I've got here. Is everybody seeing the slide?
No, but
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
now it says it started screen. Yeah, perfect. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
great. Like I said, it's been since COVID. So anyway, the BARC service is kind of a middle management interlibrary loan request process for South Central regional libraries. So that consists of about, I think we're at 90 libraries now. If the items aren't in the system, they use BARC to request out of system. So we just try to interlibrary loan items for those libraries across the country. And we do roughly, it's about 2,500 plus or minus a little bit per year. So it's a very steady workflow. We think it's a good service to provide to the community. We are a community college, so I think that's part of our mission too. And it also helps put TC3 in the minds of the general population. So if they're thinking about going back to school or looking for schools for their children, it's an option for them that they may remember. People that use libraries tend to be lifelong learners, so that kind of makes sense. So as far as the request process, it's changed a little bit since we had it several years back. Our new web page was rolled out maybe last month sometime, and it was a major revision. And as a consequence, the way you go about making requests on your patron's behalf changed. So you would begin by going to the tompkinsportland.edu site, which is our main homepage. And from there, you scroll all the way down now. And library is in the other sites column down below. I don't know if I think you can see my cursor. We're down here. And another option, you could also shortcut with the /library. And if you want to go directly to that. From that page, you scroll down to the books tab. You don't go into the quick search items. There's a reason for that I'll get into, but you go down to the books under the find, and that will take you to the books page. There's several more clicks than there used to be, but it is what it is. But under the books page, there's WorldCat, and that's where you want to go to make your searching and selection process. If you go directly to our catalog, what we found out is that Primo, which is our catalog interface, is really horrible at sorting records. So, for instance, if you requested The Shining by Stephen King, the results you get in our own catalog, the WorldCat link that rises to the top could be that record with only 3 holdings, when there's another one with 1,500 below that. And there's no way for you to tell which is the most appropriate record to get your request filled. So this way, if you can go directly into our instance of WorldCat, that's going to take care of that problem for you. What we were finding in the past with the poor record selection, which is through no fault of your own, we would have to go in and find the best records and put those into the request. And it was a lot of work on our end to kind of massage the record to give you the best chance of getting the item for your patron. Once you click on the WorldCat link down below there, you're taken to our instance of First Search. You'll see TC3 up here in the upper left corner, which tells you you're in the right place. If you go down below, there's a jump to Advanced Search, and you select WorldCat. It's going to be in one of these 2 places. If you do it the first time, it remembers it, or usually does. And either way, once you select WorldCat, you'll go to the place where you should be to make your request. Once you're in First Search, or once you're in WorldCat, I'm sorry, you can begin your search. It defaults to the Advanced tab, which is here, which gives you the most flexibility and limiters. So, for instance, you have your text boxes here and your drop-down menus over here on your right. You can see my cursor, right? Someone say yes or no.
Yes, yes, we
Okay.
can.
All right, so you've got your text boxes. You've got a drop down that has several different things like author, ISBN, things of that nature. So you can fine tune a little bit there. You can add to your search like author, as many fields as you want. As librarians and library staff, you probably realize that the more stuff you add, yes, the finer your search, but it also limits your results. So as long as you get a nice balance, you'll hopefully be able to find the item you're looking for. There are limiters down below here, and you can tweak that as far as you want to. If it was a book, if it was a sound recording, visual material, like The Shining could be the book or it could be the DVD. And so specifying the nature of the search you're doing will help you narrow down and identify the appropriate record for you. If you want a simpler way to approach things without so many options, you can go to the basic tab, which is right next to the advanced, and it's got 3 or 4 search boxes like title, author, your basic information, and you can use that and then expand from there. But I like the advanced search because you can use as much as you want. You don't have to use everything. So once you do your search, and I'm just taking an example of a BARC book that we request that we got in recently, we wind up with our search results, and I did The Shining here. So again, when you're searching WorldCat, there's a difference in symbols that you need to pay attention to. So for instance, there's a book that is a print book. You have this little picture icon, which is a DVD. There's a little speaker, which is an audio recording, and then there's a world symbol, which is an internet or electronic resource. If you pick a record with an electronic resource, you will probably 9 times out of 10 get your request canceled. Libraries, as we all know, find it very difficult to interlibrary loan audiobooks that are streaming, that are on physical media, ebooks and things of that nature. The publishing hasn't caught up to that yet. The Shining for audio recordings, it's usually going to be a CD. It'll say down here like compact disc format. Again, also with the videos, it'll say DVD format. So keep things to the physical for your request, unless they're articles, which can easily be delivered electronically. The only exception to that would be if you wanted a chapter of a book, which is usually not as much in the public sector that we're finding. But if someone needed, say, a chapter from a nonfiction book, History of George Washington, because they were doing a paper, they don't necessarily need the whole book, but they knew what the section they wanted, we could scan that and just send it electronically. So just use your judgment and what's in the best interest of your patron. So when you go to the WorldCat holdings, as I said before, it sorts from the highest number of holdings to the least. So you want to identify the format you're looking for with the highest numbers of libraries that hold it. So here, for instance, we have Rasputin's Revenge. Here's the first record has 189 libraries that have the holding under that record. Then we go down to 47, still the same book, and here we go down to 6. If you select the 189, better chance of it getting filled than the 47 libraries or the 6. The 6 is not necessarily contained in the 189. So pick the record with the highest number of holdings. When you click on the title, it takes you to that record for the item. So here it is, 189 holdings again. If you look under external resources, you'll see requests from another library. That's the that'll take you to the TC3 catalog, where you can put in your login information and submit your request. So that looks like this. When you click on the request from another library, you get taken to our catalog. And here's the record with the name of it, of the item that you selected, and you go to sign in. Now, for the way we set up external members of our community, so that wouldn't be students, faculty, or staff of TC3, you all have, as libraries, an institutional record And that account exists in Alma, which is our circulating system, and has a matching one in Iliad. So when you sign in, you're going to select Community BARC Login, which is different authentication process than the top one. And you're going to put in your BARC username. And if you don't know that, you can email me and I can give it to you, and your password. And that lets you into our catalog. You can tell you've gotten there if you see your library's name in the upper right corner, and then you're going to see the item you were looking for with request item. You click on that, and it opens up a short form, which is pre-filled in. The only exception being if you only wanted a chapter. If you check this box, it puts a couple extra fields in for page numbers, and that allows you to submit an electronic request for a chapter or a portion of the book. But otherwise, you can leave it as is and hit send request, and it flies off into space for us. And as I said before, now this is the more behind the scenes process of BARC. So this would be more for the practitioners for interlibrary loan, not necessarily the frontline service desk, or sometimes it's, you do both hats. So in our circulation system, every BARC library, that would be all 90 of them, has their own account. So this happens to be Avoca. So they exist just as if they were a patron, a student, faculty, community member, whatever. So this is initially where that request goes. Once you click submit from Alma, it gets pushed into the practitioner side of that software, and then we process that. And this is back seeing what it looks like. So the request goes into the Alma system, and it pushes it into Iliad. Now, SUNY set up a little piece of software that allows Alma and Iliad to talk to each other. And that's kind of what makes BARC work easier than it might not otherwise. So these requests start off in Alma under your library's name, get pushed to Iliad, where you have an identical username. So that way Alma knows that, oh, this is Avoca Library. This request is for the patron in Iliad, Avoca Library. And then we can create a lending string and send it off into space to try to get it. Once the BARC request is processed in Iliad and it arrives, we check it back in, we check it into the system from that lending library. So say Ontario Library in California happened to fill this. We check it in our Iliad system, and this Iliad software pushes that back into our catalog, or our circulation system, and it creates a temporary item for that title using the Iliad information. So it generates a quick barcode based on our transaction number, and it has the request information that it pulls from Alma. So it's got the title, it's got the due date, it's got all that kind of stuff that gets pushed into that system. So what we do is check it out to you under, in this case, the Avoca Library asked for this item. And Iliad's also got that checked out in that system. That's where it gets a little gummy sometimes, because you're checked out in two systems and the due dates, presumably match. Sometimes, technology being what it is, the due dates can differ. Sometimes on a renewal, Iliad forgets to talk to Alma and say this has been updated. So you may receive an overdue notice when you weren't expecting it. Don't panic. You don't necessarily have to send it back immediately. But if the paperwork that you receive on the item isn't matching the email that says you're overdue that you're getting, reach out and contact us first, because it could be that kind of situation. The software isn't always perfect, but sometimes we can get a renewal. Sometimes Alma just didn't know you had an extension on it. So before you have to tell your patron you need it back, reach out, email us, and we'll try our best to answer the question. A lot of these emails in Alma are just automatic, and we don't know they happen until they do. Once the item is returned to us, we check it in just like a regular book or DVD, whatever, in Alma. And then we also finish the request process by doing the same thing in Iliad and send it back to the lender. That is it for the description of what happens. Our workflows, we're constantly trying to improve and revise them as best we can. How many, I'll turn on the chat here. Let me go back to stop sharing. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. There we go. How many of you have used the BARC system before? Let's see. There's roughly 50. And I said we have 90 libraries. Have you found the service to be useful and straightforward? I will take silence as a yes. Oh, great. Okay. So if you need to recap what I'm discussing here, it's being recorded, but there is a how-to video that's on South Central's website. It's under the resource sharing. Ignore the live guide. It's really old. I haven't gotten around to fixing that. But the video is the newest version based on our new website. Is Iliad compatible with other non-Alma systems? That I'm not sure. Iliad is able to speak to Alma. I didn't do the coding or anything on that. I believe SUNY Central, Big SUNY, did some of that. And I would imagine something could be made or exists. Are you guys on, what systems do you use, Polaris or? What circulating system? Do you use that as a group? The same one? Oh, okay. Circe Dynex. I remember that. Yeah, I'd have to investigate. Oh, Polaris. Okay, yeah, Polaris I'm familiar with. Oh, lots of different ones. Iliad tends to be a very flexible system. OCLC owns it, and they bought it from Atlas. And they may, if you wind up doing a service like this, it would be worth investigating if whatever system you're working on could talk to Iliad and vice versa, as it would simplify the workflow a lot. Let's see, I'm wondering if you have had difficulty with items being checked in Alma and forgetting to complete. Yes, we do sometimes. Well, the main people, we don't have student workers do the behind the scenes record processing. So there's a library clerk, Andy Finkel. He does most of our lending, and Lucy, I think some of you used to know Lucy, she recently retired. She did a lot of the borrowing, and they didn't fill her position, so I am Lucy now. So I take care of the borrowing aspect of it. We're so used to this right now that we don't mess up a lot, but there are instances, as I mentioned a little bit before, where Iliad forgets or hiccups to talk to Alma and vice versa. It doesn't happen tons of times, but you won't know that there's an issue until it actually happens, and then you have to go back and investigate. But one of the nice things about Iliad is you can set the request back in time to different steps, so it's not a permanent break. You can set the request back to awaiting receiving, like you never got it in the first place, and then go through those steps again, and 9 times out of 10, it'll correct the error that you initially had when it hiccuped. Key data elements needed for Iliad requests. Finding, well, the ISBN record's not always the best because there's different versions, and your patron may not care. They could be looking for Wuthering Heights or something, and say Penguin did a copy in Random House, and they happen to be tied to different records. So there's that to keep in mind. Usually for your work, if you're looking at WorldCat and you're picking the record with the most holdings, that would usually, I mean, it would have minimal title, several publishers attach their record to it. You'd have the best bet. So you wouldn't, if you have to type something in manually, then title, author, any additional items that may be helpful. I know we had a request for Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me DVD once, and only a few libraries were attached to that record. And we thought, well, the movie's the movie. Well, it turns out that the patron actually wanted the special features bonus disc that was with that particular version of the DVD, so they needed that particular one. And we weren't aware of that at the time. We filled it with another version of Firewalk with Me, or another pressing of it, and that wasn't helpful to them. So we clarified that with the lending, or with the borrowing library, and resubmitted the request for that particular edition of it.
Greg, I don't know if you saw that there are a couple of questions in the Q&A.
Oh, I did not. I don't have that open. Let me go to the Q&A. Oh, there's the Q&A. Am I correct in understanding that BARC is how you refer to your coordinated use of all? No, BARC is a South Central term for the serve. Is it bibliographic and what? Fresh my mind, Christine. Christine, you there? Oh.
Yeah, I'd have to check it out
We
as
just call it BARC. It's just,
Yeah.
it's BARC.
Yeah.
Bibliographic and something, whatever.
The R is for referral.
A referral center or something like that.
Yeah.
Yes, it isn't the coordinated use of Alma and Iliad doesn't really have a name. In the Iliad, I guess technically it's called an NSIP add-on, which is a term that is like an app that sits in Iliad and sends information back and forth. It's not specific to Alma, but NSIPs are just little programs that are inserted in the software. And this one happens to be, I don't know if IDS developed it in conjunction with SUNY or not, but because SUNY's all on one system, that's the place for it. I'm wondering if you had difficulty. I did answer the items being checked in Alma and forgetting to complete the process in OCLC. Well, for that, as far as checking in OCLC, that would be more of an impact on the lending library than the borrowing, because your items are checked out in Alma as far as you're concerned. You don't see the Iliad side of it where the lending library is. And I don't believe our Iliad sends out automated overdue notices. I think it's just the Alma side that you might get sent. So with that, like I routinely go through the OCLC, or the Iliad overdues, which connects to OCLC, and I try to do some house cleaning with that and just make sure everything kind of coincides. So it isn't super labor intensive. What is Alma? Oh, no, Alma is, we used to be on Aleph, was our old circulation system, and they're, I'm trying to remember the company, Ex Libris, which is a company, I believe, in Jerusalem. Their next incarnation, SUNY stayed with that for 17 years, and so the next software system that SUNY adopted for the library management system was called Alma, which is another product of Ex Libris. I think I got everything. Is there anything?
I don't see anything else, so I think we're all set. Thank you so much, Greg. I appreciate you jumping in at such late notice.
Oh, no problem. Am I on time? Should I talk slower or faster?
No, we're doing good. We're doing good. It's actually, we're heading into our break, And so I want to let everyone know that we'll be back around 2:15 to start up with the panel. And for now, you can take a chance to go get some whatever you need. All the things we talked about from Melissa. So that's it. Thanks, Greg.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Greg, would you mind just dropping your contact information into the chat box when you have a moment, just in case folks have other questions that might come up later?
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll give you my email and all that kind of stuff.
Fantastic. We will see everyone back here in about 10 minutes. All right, as folks continue trickling back in from the break, I'm going to get started on introducing our panelists who are going to discuss trends in resource sharing. First, please remember to add questions to the Q&A box as they come up, and definitely feel free to discuss and add comments in the chat as you have been. I would like to thank Tor, Haley, and Sarah for joining us here today for our mini conference. We really appreciate you lending your time and energy to this annual event, and we're excited to hear your diverse perspectives on resource sharing. Tor Loney, who uses he, him pronouns, is a library development specialist with the New York State Library. Haley Mikolojak, who uses she, her pronouns, is a program consultant with the Southern Tier Library System. And Sarah Shank, who uses she, her pronouns, is the Access Services Manager at Ithaca College. Now let's get into our panel discussion. First up, we'd love to know about the resource sharing responsibilities in your current role. When you answer, please start by introducing yourself. Describe your current position and prior library or other relevant experiences you would like to share.
I can start. I'm Sarah Shank, and I am the Access Services Manager at Ithaca College, which Sophie kindly shared already. I've only been the Access Services Manager for about 6 months, and previously I've spent about 20 years doing interlibrary loan and resource sharing work. My favorite part, I would have to say, is the borrowing aspects and hunting down those hard to find requests for patrons. Outside of the library, I like getting lost in the woods. I live in the Ithaca area, and there's so many trails around here. And short walk to the Finger Lakes Trail. And then I, like Melissa earlier, Melissa, right? I also practice yoga regularly, and it keeps me sane.
I can go next. So my name is Haley Mikolojak. I am the program consultant with the Southern Tier Library System. I've been here for a little over a year now, and previously to that, I worked in academic libraries and public and access services. So shout out to Melissa earlier, and spent some time in public libraries doing youth programming. And over the summer, in my spare time, I have a hobby farm. So I have chickens and ducks and a horse and a mule, and I kind of live out in the boons. And I like to joke that I have my work personality, and then when I go home, I'm like feral in the woods, like doing all sorts of outdoor things. So thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tor Loney. I'm a library development specialist with the New York State Library. My areas of focus here, I've been here for just under 3 years. And my areas of focus are equity, access, and opportunity efforts, and outreach and continuing education for libraries. I have experience in academic and public libraries, and I previously spent a long time at Albany Public Library. I'm in Albany now, where I worked, and before that was in academic libraries for a little bit. And I worked in information literacy, youth services, and community outreach in all of those areas. And then personally, I play guitar and write songs, and I like music. And I like to spend time with my family. And yes, absolutely looking forward to hiking and getting outside when there is not renewed ice coming every day.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing. Our next question, what does resource sharing look like at your institution? Is it primarily ILL, or has it expanded to include other services? And if so, what services?
So at the Southern Tier Library System, we serve 48 public libraries across 5 different counties. So that's Allegheny, Chemung, Schuyler, Steuben, and Yates. And that service area is roughly 250,000 people. As a system, we do interlibrary loan amongst ourselves. So we have multiple delivery vans that circulate every day. There's multiple routes, and that's 6 days a week. Our ILS, I checked with our ILS team before this just to see how many items we circulated. And in 2024, it was just over 297,000. So that's pretty cool. We also participate in BARC services. So shout out to Greg before. We do a lot of communication with him. And also last year we did about 1,600 outside items through BARC. So that's great for us. We use this as a last resort. So it's kind of, we check amongst ourselves and see what we have and then decide if we would like to purchase. And then if not, we do that process through BARC. We also have rotating collections, so large print, audio, and youth books that travel on a 3-month basis to our member libraries. And then in our deliveries, we also share flyers, promotional materials, and anything for system-wide events. And then, of course, all of our members have digital resources that we share, so Ground News, Novel New York, Libby, and then we recently added Canopy and Mango Languages. So we do a lot of different types of resource sharing, physically and digitally to our members.
Awesome. Sarah, you want to go next?
Sure, I can do that. For the most part, from our patrons' perspective, I think resource sharing is still mostly interlibrary loan. On the back end, we may decide to purchase something instead of borrowing. So we have a bit of a purchase on demand system happening. We've integrated external services like Reprints Desk into our workflows to help manage copyright. And in the last year or so, we've began a library of things. So something I've noticed that's checked out recently is we have like a clothing steamer that somebody has checked out.
I love that. So I want to clarify for all of my answers. I will be answering in relation to the Division of Library Development, which is part of the wider New York State Library. So the New York State Library does have a public library that does ILL and other traditional and non-traditional resource sharing. We also have Tibble, the Talking Book and Braille Library, that does a fantastic, beautiful resource sharing. I'm not going to talk about either of those because they're not the areas that I work in. Library development's primary audience is libraries and library workers. So our sort of cliched response is that libraries are our patrons. And so for us, resource sharing includes funding assistance, consultations, reports, and toolkits, both that we sort of develop on our own, but we can also develop on request, guidance, signal boosting, and convening.
Great. Thanks for all of that information. I do love the library of things, and renting a steamer would be great. Okay, our next question is how do you feel, how do you think the field of resource sharing has evolved since you first began your career in libraries? And we'll start with Sarah.
I've been around for a little bit. When I started with resource sharing, I started on OCLC's way back passport system. I don't know if anyone remembers that. But it was, there were all these shortcuts you had to know to kind of find the things you needed. I remember spending a lot of time at the copier, copying things and printing them out and then mailing those physical copies to libraries. So I think interlibrary loan and resource sharing has really made a lot of progress in the digital aspects. I remember in my first position receiving some sort of pamphlet from SUNY Brockport saying, hey, join Odyssey and start sending things electronically. And that was just, it was fun trying to figure out how to integrate that into a workflow. Now systems have changed and I think they're evolving more. A few years ago when Iliad or OCLC announced that they were going to do away with Iliad, I think that was a chance for the community to say, what should we be thinking about or doing differently? And so some things, first they pushed back and we still have Iliad, so that's great. We don't have Iliad right now, but I mean, the community has Iliad. And um, it opened some doors for products like Reshare and some other systems to kind of come on board and find new creative ways to fill resource sharing needs. I never thought that I would have to go back to ALA forms, paper requests or, the digital form of ALA forms. But because we adopted Rapido and are somewhat disconnected from OCLC, we've had to do that. It's not the most terrible thing, and I'm always looking for ways to find things from other libraries. Um, so that's basically how I see interlibrary loan changing, at least since I've been involved. I feel like there are many more possibilities available now. Things like BARC, the ISO ILL connections that you can have with Iliad and other systems make more sharing possible. And I know IDS project is working on software called Crosslink that will hopefully connect using the ISO ILO protocol more libraries together in more of a peer-to-peer way instead of relying on a third-party broker. So these are some of the things I'm thinking about and excited about.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Tor, do you have any thoughts on this question?
Sure. Yeah. I think the shift to digital, I was in a public library when the ebooks really broke, and there was this just massive, the fear of the death of libraries was the story, that every newspaper wanted to talk about. We know that didn't happen. And to me, like, my take on why that didn't happen speaks to the change that I've really been the most excited about, which is the increase in outreach and community partnership that libraries have engaged in, and a broadening of which resources libraries collect and share. So I also the expansion of makerspaces and libraries of things, I just think are amazing and really speak to um, the potential for libraries, even though the word comes from book, and I was really struck by someone pointing out, and this kind of made the rounds a few years ago, that we are one of the few professions who are named for the building we work in, um, which is a weird limiter. But I think it again speaks to the power of the building. So I think the increased awareness of libraries as third spaces. Someone published a story last year that libraries are in many areas the only public bathroom in a community is in the public library. These are often the only free space that folks can be in, and I think that fact is something I'm really thinking about increasingly. Yeah, bookarians, resourcearians, yes. Um, uh, I think, at a well, I'll pause and say, again, this is just my personal sort of perspective on libraries, but my focus has always been on community engagement and programming in libraries. And so what I've always told folks is if libraries didn't have any books in them, but they still did all the other stuff, I would still be all in. But if they only had books and didn't do the other stuff, I would get a different job. And I love books. I have a house full of books. I have two large to be read stacks next to my bed. But it's all of the other things are the ones that really make my heart sing. And I think right now, at a time when many folks are being told they aren't welcome, their identity itself is being challenged. Libraries stand as a crucial safeguard. Libraries are not and have never been neutral, and they stand for equity and access and autonomy. And I think polls repeatedly show that libraries are trusted, safe spaces, and I believe that's directly connected to the casual radicalness of libraries. It's not because they're neutral, it is instead because they fight for the user. So it's libraries as place are the piece I think that I'm the most psyched about currently.
Great, thanks. And we do have a couple of comments. Like Yvonne's, gone are the shushing days, thank goodness. And libraries are not and have never been neutral is a quote I'm going to take with me. That is a good one. I like how you pointed out about it's like the last place where you could just be. You're not expected you're not expected to have to buy something. You can just be. So that's something I've been conscious of for quite a while. So thank you. I know, Haley, you're on the early end of your career, so I don't know if you have anything to add to this, any thoughts, but you're welcome to do so.
I just think it's great to hear from other two professionals who have been in the field for long bits of time. And even in my little bit of time that I have been in the field, like there is always things that are constantly changing and evolving. And I look forward to seeing that in the future.
I see that Yvonne has shared a quote from Elie Wiesel's The Night Trilogy, and
Yeah.
that thank you so much for sharing that. It's very relevant, both to this conversation and I think what's happening in our country more widely. Also, as a book person, one of my favorite books is the book Night. So really appreciate you sharing that. Tor, I appreciate your comment as well. It's good to be together at this time and to, share these reminders and words of wisdom with each other. So just want to take the opportunity to say thank you all for being here and for, holding space together. And speaking of, I'm going to move into our next question, which is how do you incorporate DEI into your resource sharing services? And as a follow-up, has the backlash to DEI impacted your library and institution? And if so, how? Haley, you want to get started with this one?
Sure. So our system has a DEI committee that meets fairly regularly. And a part of that is they have created similar rotating collections to ones that I've mentioned before. So they did one called Community Voices, which shared a lot of different perspectives in the world, and that rotated through our members. And upcoming, we have the I'm Your Neighbor collection. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that company, but they created a pocket of books targeted at youth that center around immigrant stories, which I think is really interesting and very applicable to the times. So that'll be going through our membership. We definitely, prior to my start, have seen book challenges and have really used that to like rally our communities and really support our members. I kind of joke when I talk to our youth staff, I'm like, I'm your biggest cheerleader. Like, I want to support you and cheer you on. And so really keeping like DEI on the forefront of the services that we provide and preparing our members for things that they might encounter on a day-to-day when they are interacting with their patrons.
Great. Thanks, Haley. Sarah, do you want to jump in on that question?
I took everything very literal to mean interlibrary loan and resource sharing when I was thinking about these. I think one of the biggest things we do is try to make things accessible to people. So making sure that files and things like that are OCR'd and compliant so people can actually use them. And then another thing we come across is sometimes someone will request a particular format of something. So uh, going that extra mile to make sure that we're getting the requested format may go a long way to making them feel included and appreciated.
Thanks, Sarah. Tor, do you have anything to add here?
Sure. Yeah, diversity, equity, and inclusion are foundational to my work. And libraries and collections have historically been inequitable, both passively and by intent. When laws changed, libraries were not always the first to allow people of color into their buildings. And our collections have historically reflected that same bias. Libraries have tended to be white space. So I believe our work needs to actively address that. Within library development, two resources that we've created, I'm going to drop links to these in the chat. are a 2020 document titled RAC Vision and a recently published, sorry, I'm trying to grab that link, Office of Cultural Education DEI Toolkit. Both of these were created by working with folks from libraries and other collecting institutions across the state and their stakeholders and asking what they would like to see. So the process of these was really cool because it really was bottom up by intent, where we went out and had stakeholder groups and surveys and worked with folks in a really wide capacity to really just collect and try to condense what folks were saying that they wanted from these two tools. RAC Vision is a document intended to capture the shared values and priorities of libraries. And one of 5 key shared values that was highlighted is equity for all, which was expressed as our libraries champion equity, diversity, and inclusion and model how to incorporate it by having collections, staffing, programming, and leadership reflect our communities. The DEI Toolkit was created to provide practical guidance and applications of diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, anti-racism, and justice for New York museums, libraries, archives, historical and genealogical societies, and cultural heritage sites. So you can see that's a pretty broad swath. The toolkit was created for libraries, museums, and archives collectively, and as such, it is fairly broad and not always distinctly helpful for libraries. Because of this, we're doing ongoing work to add library-specific components, most recently around intellectual freedom and diversity in collections. So those are a couple of library-specific additions that we've made. And then the last sort of major piece that we're working on the most recently is we're engaged in a major push to help libraries improve their accessibility, both in terms of their physical space and also in terms of digital access. Can folks with limited vision use the card catalog and know what programs exist, what kind of signage exists, what are the various ways that folks are being reached?
I just want to put a plug in for the DEI toolkit that Tor talked about and linked. I went to, at NYLA, Tor's session about the DEI toolkit, and that's actually where I asked him to participate in this conference. It was a great presentation, and definitely take the time to check out that LibGuide because it has excellent resources.
Did we have any questions?
I just realized I don't know if any of us answered the second question that I think Sophie sort of bundled in, because I'm just looking it on my sheet. So I will say, I think this gets into the next question that Christine, I think you're about to ask. So I won't answer that one yet, but the question of the backlash, the state library is in an odd space in a few ways. One is that we're a state agency, but most of us, including everyone in my department, are federally funded. So we've been trying to figure that out. There's been real unclarity. I mean, everyone's seeing this. So I guess I will go ahead and pre-answer the next one because it just dovetails right into this. So a concern that I'm having, and this is something that thankfully hasn't happened in New York State, or at least within state ed, which the library is part of, is sort of preemptive responses to things. Folks sort of, as we're seeing with all of these executive orders, they're almost maybe literally all being blocked when they finally come to a judgment. And so I'm worried that folks are going to be preemptively responding to anti-DEI attempts, and that in some cases then the damage will be done and you won't be able to hire back, you won't be able to re-implement something. I think of that picture of the library from like 2 years ago, I guess, the library in Florida that had the empty shelves. And that was one such case. And there was something terrible happening there. And there were books that did end up being removed, but they preemptively removed all the books. And that's the scary image for me of like, I think we need to be, you know, cautious, not overly, you know, we don't know we don't know so much right now. And so I think, you know, as much as we can safeguard, I think we should be.
Great, thanks. Yes, I think we're facing the backlash, and you raise a good point about the preemptive compliance. You know, that's yes, these things are getting shut down, but we're hearing constant, you know, on the news and in social media about that, and it's kind of natural to respond to avoid the problems. So, any other thoughts, questions, comments on the backlash? Okay, let's jump into the next question. And that is, what is the number one resource sharing concern you face in your current role? And also related to that in the field at large. So I know Tor has addressed some of that. I'll move to Sarah. Do you have any thoughts or comments or questions about that?
My concern is, again, focused more on resource sharing and interlibrary loan in general. It's just how do we stay connected as systems change? And some vendors are willing to enable connectivity between different systems and some aren't. And how do we still remain connected with those partners that we have that may not have a technology connection? So in our change from OCLC or WorldShare to Rapido, I really appreciate the libraries that, even though I understand everybody is underfunded and understaffed and all of that, I really appreciate all the libraries that are still willing to loan to us outside of the system. So that spirit of resource sharing is the thing that I think I'm most concerned about, like connectivity and how much are we impacted by all of these external factors. So.
Thanks, Sarah. Haley, do you have some thoughts to share?
Yeah, I think mine are definitely along the lines of Sarah. I was thinking a little bit more literally to my position. I share a lot of the information to our members, and with 48 libraries, there's always change happening. So providing like the right way to share this information and share updates, what works best for people in the moment. You know, they're all encountering so many different things on a daily basis, and continuing to offer that resource sharing piece to their patrons, I think is really important. So definitely like accessibility as a whole.
Great, thanks. And we do have some good comments in the chat. I wanted to share one, and I've been reading this almost constantly for the past couple of weeks. We want to keep participating. We want to keep doing things. One of the things that some people have arranged is the U.S. economic blackout tomorrow, not buying anything. If you do need to buy something, go to a local store. So keep in mind, you know, we still have some power, you know. Yes, we're seeing it being eroded, but there are some things we can do. So, you know, I see Grace also shared a New York bill, so we have that link as well. So, yeah, there are some things we can do. You know, it's an ever-changing world, and we'll keep moving ahead.
Just to kind of piggyback on that, Christine, those are really good points. And I know it can feel like nothing we do is like big enough or good enough right now. I know I get kind of wrapped up into that, and it's an easy thing to do, but there's kind of nothing too small, just like there's no what did they say in the theater? No role is a small role, just small actors. And I know there are, of course, things that people will need to purchase tomorrow as any other day. But as Christine said, supporting local businesses when possible is a really great way to go, because they don't really take days off. And those corporations that we're trying to not support tomorrow, one day is nothing to them. So that's just a small thing that you can do tomorrow. And I'm going to get into our next question now, if that's all right. Unless, Sarah, did you share? Okay, all right. I looked away for a moment to pull a link and didn't know if I missed something. How do you see AI impacting resource sharing? Just another light question. And Sarah, do you want to start this one?
Sure. I think for resource sharing in particular, the generative AI can seem very scary in terms of validating citations and things like that. So a lot of the work that I did as a borrowing person was validating citations, and so the generative AI can seem very scary. But I think there's also great opportunity. I think there's the possibility that some of the AI tools can help with data, management and cleanup and kind of assessing services and finding ways to improve them too.
Great, thank you, Sarah. It's really important to remember. Tori, you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I'm mostly worried about AI. Um, I think in terms of information literacy, I think it's really concerning. And then I think the thing I've been thinking about the most around AI recently is the potential for inequity. And we see it right now. There's paid tiers that are miles better than the free tier. And so, but as we know, everyone believes the first certain thing that they see. And so those first things are widely different. And so then the things that have traction, the things that are getting shared, I mean, we know, Google's, AI assist, with the kids telling people how many rocks a day are ideal to eat. There's problems with it sort of in terms of accuracy. Also, the environmental impact of AI is extreme, and where it's doing the most harm is in the most impoverished parts of the world. So, Sophie, you said another light question. So I think there's, I had certainly have concerns about it exacerbating, which is such a shame because it's such an amazing thing that if used for good could be democratizing and really incredible. And so I'll shift to the places that I'm the most excited are the pushbacks around that. I actually at the Library Association at the NYLA conference got to be part of a group where I was just, there on the side basically, but somebody was sharing about work that they've been doing where they're actually having community groups create their own, they called them walled gardens. That was a new term for me. They were creating their own AI assisted computing systems that were homespun and safe. They were protected and internal, but were still able to do the same kind of, there was still AI creation and search that were facilitated as part of that. And so I think the grassroots potential for using these tools, and I'm not that hopeful about sort of policies being put in place that will protect these, but I am hopeful about, the just the power of regular folks with different expertise to build things that are useful to their communities. So that's where I'm looking.
Thank you, Tor. I think what you said at the end is really relevant. There's a quote that I've heard, kind of around these last couple of months, which is look for the helpers. So even when things seem really dark, there are always helpers, which just kind of goes along with what I said earlier about, small things, small acts of defiance. So really great to look out for the helpers, and we are very lucky that we have a lot of them in this field. I also want to point out that several of the ESLN councils have put on workshops recently on AI, kind of everything from what is AI to some of the concerns that Tor just brought up. So you can check out the council's websites and see if there are any upcoming ones. I just did a quick search and I saw one or two. So always good to be, making sure that we're keeping up with things as much as possible. I know there's so much to keep up with these days, but this is absolutely going to impact all of us if it hasn't already. And Haley, did you have anything to add for this question?
Yeah, I think we're like such a perfect segue because a lot of what I was going to talk about was like staying educated and staying informed on top of AI and all the different kind of tools. And like I've had some conversations. I'm in a working group where we have produced some AI practicing for our youth programmers, and like really don't be afraid to try something and figure out why you do or don't like it and investigate that on the back end to like do some research about what you're using and why it could be negative or positive to the field. There's a lot of communication about accidental purchasing of AI material, completely AI generated books and images. And I think about how that impacts the publishing field as a whole. So I just really staying informed, attending those webinars, and really putting yourself in the forefront and try to take some responsibility in your own right.
Yeah, I love that, Haley. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to move on to the next question. What is one thing about resource sharing that excites you the most? A positive question, yay. Whoever wants to start can go for it.
I can go. I love how connected we can be within resource sharing. Like my favorite thing is having one of our little local libraries that has no stoplight get a book from California or Seattle. Like it's so neat to see how, as a field, we're able to collaborate in these little minuscule things. Like the patron just shows up and the book is there, and they have no idea that so many hands have been a part of that and gotten it to where it goes. And so I just think it's a really awesome resource as a field that we're able to offer and be really good collaborators. And I think that that's what like being a good librarian is about, being open to collaborate. And so that's like my favorite piece, is seeing where everything kind of comes from and being a part of that.
That's great. Thank you. Sarah, you want to go next?
Sure, I would agree with Haley. It's really great to see where things come from, and it's really magical to see or be able to provide something for a faculty or staff or maybe even a community member that wasn't expecting you to actually be able to get the thing. So that's been one of the most fulfilling things. It's kind of service.
I love both of those, and I just wrote a note to myself, which is libraries are magic. And I remember, the first time I heard that, I thought like, yes, 100%. And that was my experience as a patron before I worked in libraries, was like, wait, you can get this thing that you don't have here. And a few years ago, there started to be some kind of pushback against libraries are magic, because it was like, no, libraries aren't magic. Like it was intended as a positive pushback. It was like, no, libraries aren't magic. These are workers laboring to do this work. So it was intended as a labor support, which I love and I think is really important. But I sort of think that's actually the deep magic. Like, and it made me think of when my parents told me, and no spoilers, folks, I have a Santa spoiler, so if I don't, cover your ears. But when I was told that Santa did not exist, I was very upset. And my mom said, but the spirit of Santa is real. And now you get to be part of that. And like a real sucker, I took that to heart and have stayed with that. And we just had that same conversation with our son like this past year. And I think it's really beautiful and powerful. And like, this is the thing, like, so I would say the same things. And I think of the second part of that beautiful Mr. Rogers quote of "Look for the helpers," and that was something his mom said to him when he was afraid. And then the second line is, "There will always be helpers." And to me, that's the piece that is like, what changes do I think will ensure the future success? Is that I fully believe there will always be helpers, and the buildings might have a different name. We might have a different way of doing it. That's why the ebook thing never felt scary to me, because it was like, it wasn't about the shape of the content. It was about the intent of helping someone. So I think, you know, I envision even more collaboration, and I would love to see more solidarity among library workers and beyond the library field with other truth tellers and educators, and for us to see that we're all together in this. I think some of what we've seen around ebook publishing agreements has been heartening, although still not that successful. But I think the more efforts like that, where folks can really come together around standing up for what's true and standing up for the folks we serve and each other. Um, and I'm seeing more of that.
Thank you, Tor. Thank you all three of you for those answers, and thanks for giving us the source for the Look for the Helpers. I wasn't going to say this, but the place I heard it was on my favorite podcast, which is called My Favorite Murder. So I'm glad we got the actual source there. And I also just wanted to point out a really nice comment that we got from one of our participants, which is, "I always geek out about seeing where my ILL loan came from, and I like studying how different libraries brand their books and how much metadata one can derive from it." And I relate to that. I think you're in the right place for geeking out. Thank you for sharing. Christine, you want to pose the next question?
Yes, thanks. Okay, so what is something that you wish librarians who don't work in resource sharing knew about resource sharing? And I will start with Haley. Do you have anything?
I think it kind of piggybacks off what I said before, is that there are a lot of hands in the pot when resource sharing. And so when there may be snafus or something may not come as you expect it to be, like, that's okay. There's probably 12 to 15 people that have handled that item in the last 2 to 3 days or last week. And you can't always control that. So you kind of have to just like go with the flow and be open to having to send something back or maybe send an email. And I think that just kind of adds into we are all collaborators and communicators, and we can make it work. So kind of just that piece, that there is so much that happens behind the scenes. And I think resource sharing is not always like what is immediately thought of when you're like, what does a library do? You think about, oh, it has the books and they have the programs and they have tutoring, or it's kind of one of those background things. Sometimes it just happens and you need all of those people to make it happen. And so I just think that that's really important to acknowledge and keep remembering.
Great, thanks. Sarah, do you have anything you want to add?
I don't know. I think I was thinking of this question a little differently, but I guess for me, it's just because there's a record for it out there doesn't mean that I'm going to be able to get my hands on it. Sadly, we can try. I mean, I'm one of those people that will, stay with a request until it's probably beyond. But there's only in the end so much that we can do. But
And thanks for that reminder. Yes, that is important. Tor.
I was just going to add that, to me, my answer to this would be all librarians work in resource sharing. And I'm not saying that to minimize, what traditional resource sharing and and the massive work. And I love, that phrase, unseen labor. Like, that's what I was thinking about with what you're saying. Like, it's really important. And I think there are, libraries, there's so much unseen labor that makes the magic happen in libraries. But I guess I would encourage anyone who works in a library to see their value and see the resources that they're sharing. And it could just be their expertise, and it could even just be themselves. Like it's not even necessarily something that you learned. It's just your willingness to be a helper and to serve. So anyone who doesn't think they do, I would gently challenge that.
We just got a comment. Mr. Rogers was my first crush. I think you're in the right profession, given that information. Yeah, Haley says, I love that. So do I. All right, I think we're going to do about 2 more questions here. Oh, look at that Mr. Rogers sticker. Where'd you get that, Tor? Do you know? Tor, do you remember where you got that sticker?
This is a magnet that I got from the Department of Public Broadcasting, who works down the hall from us, and we partner with them. So we did a Reading Rainbow program with them, and then Jackie Stapleton, the head of that department, brought me this. So
That is fantastic. They should sell those. I really think that they would do well.
agreed.
Really. Could do some pins or stickers as well. All right, we are coming close to the end of the panel discussion right now. So I think we're going to ask about 2 more questions, but if anybody has questions, any participants have questions that we haven't answered yet, please go ahead and drop those in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we get to them at the end of the session. Christine, do you want to ask the next question?
Sure. Okay. What changes, if any, were made to ILL after it was resumed following the pandemic? And Tor, do you want to start that one?
I'll just answer really shortly because this is a very specific answer, and I'm really interested to hear the wider answers and folks who have much more experience and expertise here. So I was in a public library, and ILL was part of my work, but mostly part of someone else in my branch's job. But my perception was within our library, the return of ILL was not widely promoted. And this may have just been specific to that library, but my feeling was that some or maybe most of the folks involved in ILL found it tedious and annoying. And I think there wasn't a lot of energy to make sure patrons knew it was an option again. The person in my branch loved ILL, and so did I. We thought it was magic. So we did, within our, to our sort of local patrons, but there wasn't a major push of like, hey, ILL is back. I think also like we were all shot, so like that was part of that too. I think people were exhausted, but yeah, I'm really curious about what Haley and Sarah are gonna answer.
Great, thanks. Sarah.
Okay, I can go next. Well, during the pandemic, we continued to do like electronic article sharing, mostly thanks to a service that Rapid ILL provided during that time. And then when we came back, book borrowing was really low. And at that time, we had to make some budgetary decisions, and our director then decided to say, okay, we're going to switch to this new interlibrary loan product called Rapido. And we ended up being the first library in the United States, I believe, or in North America, that went to the system, which is very scary from a connection to other people standpoint. Luckily, we had a very strong Alma resource sharing connection with all of the State University of New York libraries. I don't think that switch would have been possible without their support. So I'm ever grateful to all of my SUNY partners and all of the libraries that have been lending to us that way. Yes, go Tim Jackson. And he's one of the reasons we got into it. And he's very into finding ways to connect libraries together. So that was our big change. I think some several years now down the road, our physical lending is starting to increase more. So it's nice to see that back up on the rise. I think that's all I'll say for now.
I'll kind of jump in. In my young librarian era, so I was a student worker during COVID times, and a lot of that I saw the like accessibility changes. Like there was a lot of scanning and emailing, and that has shifted now back to physical transactions. But a lot of our public libraries were able to take that time and do big collection leads and overhauls and really evaluate like what they're providing to their communities. And so I think that has been really neat to see jumping back into public libraries after COVID and seeing how that transition, but also the services that we have offered, just the use of our buildings, what we're providing to our communities. I think it was a really important check-in for what services we're offering and what resources our communities are actually needing and taking advantage of. And cheers to anybody who was in the COVID pandemic times and having to go through all of those constant changes. As a student worker, I looked up to people in the field and really appreciated that. And it has been wonderful to see how that has transitioned now 5 years out.
Great. Thank you all for sharing very different perspectives. Really appreciate that. We're going to wrap up with one last question. What changes do you think will ensure the future success and sustainability of the resource sharing field? Sarah, would you mind starting this one?
For me, I think being open to like learning more about interoperability between systems and that sort of thing are going to be very important in the traditional resource sharing realm. I think for our students being open to listening to what they're really needing, and then we can provide those resources to them. So those are the things I'm thinking about.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for sharing. Haley, you want to go next?
I think it's really important for us to just remind ourselves that change is inevitable. And so being able to adapt to that constant change and shift in what we're providing our members. You know, even just talking about COVID, what our people needed 5 years ago is not what they need now. It's not what they're going to need in 5 more years. And so really keeping in check and thinking about what services you're providing, what resources you can offer. Our system just did a voter registration drive because we realized a lot of our communities didn't have access to that material. So for us, it's really checking in with the public and seeing what the public needs from us and how we can fit that need and fill that gap.
Totally. Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Tor, you want to bring up the rear here?
I think more of this, I think more connecting to each other and sharing experience and shoring each other up. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, and I think also offline and finding physical spaces to connect and be together, either in action or, just in hanging out and like intentional, not in action, watching the stupidest movie you can find together. But like, I think really the more that we can be connected and see all the ways that we're connected. I mean, I just think it's really amazing. I mean, I'll say this, like, for me, despite what I said about believing, which I do, that all library workers are involved in resource sharing, I would not have thought that this necessarily would be, this conference was necessarily for me. Because I would have had the same thought, well, I don't do ILL, and I think, Sophie, I might have even responded that to you. And I don't want to, water down or detract from a focus really important. It's really important that we get with folks and hear messages that are really applicable. But I think also like to be seeing our connectedness across across areas of focus, and to be gathering more. That's I've been finding that needed and heartening.
Thank you, Tor. I think that's a great way to wrap up this discussion. This is part of the reason that we called this conference ILL and Beyond, because there's a very common, I don't want to call it a misconception because it's not necessarily untrue, but there's a conception that resource sharing and ILL are synonymous. And they're not. ILL is part of resource sharing, but it's just one part. So as you said earlier, really all librarians and library workers and cultural heritage workers and professionals are in the business of resource sharing. So I think, it's great if this conference brought in some more folks who would consider themselves not a traditional, part of resource sharing. And there's more work to do to kind of spread the word and include other folks, both from inside our institutions and from outside. Well, if there are no other questions, I think we addressed most of them during the panel discussion. I will share the panelists' contact information in the chat just in case anyone has lingering questions or something comes up later. And I want to say thank you again to the members of our panel for a lively and engaging discussion. And I will pass the mic over to Christine.
Thanks, Sophie, and thank you, Sarah, Tor, and Haley, for all of your great comments and sharing everything you did. We appreciate that. And now I will introduce our final speaker of the day, and that is Maria Degatano. She is the Delivery Services Manager for Empire Library Delivery, also known as ELD. It's a service of ESLN, and she is going to provide us some information about ELD. Maria is the Delivery Services Manager for the Empire State Library Network and has been managing the statewide delivery program, ELD, for 7 years. She is based out of the Capital District Library Council in Albany, where she also serves as the Finance and Administration Manager. And now I will turn it over to Maria.
Thanks, Christine, and hi, everybody. Thanks for sticking around for this. Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Yes.
Here. Okay, great. I just wanted to comment quickly on the panelists and what they were saying, and just add to that as a non-librarian. I'm glad that I can be a part of that resource sharing circle by participating and helping with the delivery throughout the state. Like you were mentioning, people don't always know where or how their books got there, but and I find when I tell people what I do, they're like, what do you mean books get moved all over the state? So it is an important part of what the libraries do, and I'm glad I can be a part of it that way. But so moving on with the presentation, I saw in the participant list that there's a number of veteran ELD members that are on the call, and then also some names I don't recognize. So hopefully this will be some new information of those people. But for the people who are ELD members, please feel free to chime in or comment on anything I might have missed. And for new people, if you want to ask questions in the chat or the Q&A, I can get to those at the end. So I'm just going to jump in. This is kind of an overview of Empire Library Delivery, and then just some comments about what the next year would bring. So what is Empire Library Delivery? It is a delivery service which we often hear referred to as ELD, which is a statewide delivery program offered by the Empire State Library Network. ELD makes resource sharing between New York State libraries affordable and streamlined by bundling shipments and providing daily service to the libraries through an outsourced courier service. Currently, there are 2 couriers that handle deliveries for ELD. One handles the city and the lower Hudson Valley, and the other handles everything else upstate. And they coordinate to hand off deliveries between the 2 couriers. My computer's a little, actually, sorry. Let me just turn off this video because my computer heats up and gets very slow. So who we are, currently ELD consists of 123 libraries. 33 of those are private academics, 55 SUNYs, which is no longer all the SUNYs. In the past, all the SUNYs were required to participate, but some of the smaller ones that were only loaning a few things here and there have since dropped. The 23 CUNY locations and 12 public library systems throughout New York State. This also includes around 70 IDS project members. You can find there's a link here to the ELD roster where you can find all those members, and I can walk you through that too when we get to the end. The ELD advisory group determines the overall management of the statewide delivery service, which includes managing the contract and the policies and procedures. This group is made up from members of all different library types, as well as 3 of the directors from the ESLIN councils. I handle the daily management of the delivery service, and I act as a liaison between the members and the courier, reporting the misstops and deliveries, managing missing resources and claims, and also negotiating the contract and providing service updates to members. So what we do, the Empire Library Delivery Service moves around, in the past year, we moved around 190,000 items between the 123 institutions. This volume and the number of institutions has decreased over the last few years. We saw this decline in 2020 and 2021, where volume went way down. As you guys were talking to in the panel, we've definitely seen that go back up in the past few years, but we have had a number of institutions. We used to be around 135 members, so that has gone down slightly. But our volume is on the rise, so that's good news. And just lastly, what we can ship through ELD, it's primarily for the obvious books, periodicals, newspapers, videos, CDs if people are still using those. And occasionally we'll get special requests to move things between libraries, and that's something we kind of look at on a case-by-case basis. Occasionally that people will need to move some non-typical things. This is just a quick diagram which shows the process, which is fairly simple and probably exactly as you would all expect it to be. You request the book, the library gets the book ready. The courier will pick it up in 2 to 5 days, and we say 2 to 5 days because what happened during the pandemic was a lot of libraries, when their volume decreased, they realized they weren't really needing 5 days of service anymore. So many decided to drop their service to 2 or 3 days, 2 being the minimum that you can do with ELD. So it did kind of change the transit times that we see and the pickup days that the courier comes. So, a request comes in on 1 day, but maybe it's not picked up for 2 or 3 days. The books then go to one of the 6 hubs that are managed by the couriers, depending on the area of the state you're in. They get sorted that night, and then are moved out on the line haul to the either an in-between hub that they need to go to be transferred or their receiving hub and out, depending on the time the day gets there, the next day, and then would get delivered to your library on your next delivery day. Again, now that we don't have everybody on 5 days, that can vary. So gets to the courier on Wednesday, but you're not getting delivery till next Monday, so it can add a little bit of a delay there. And this is just a visual for you on where the members are throughout the state and the hubs that their service, or the number of locations that are in each hub. Albany, Binghamton, Buffalo, New York City, Rochester, and Syracuse are the hubs. The Albany and Newburgh hub, just for those of you that have been on ELD for a while, you remember we used to have a separate hub there, and that was something that was combined a few years back. So we still refer to it as the Albany Newburgh hub. In addition to that, there's a transfer point that I spoke about earlier, where the two couriers hand off in Rockland County, not being a hub, but just somewhere where there's a transfer point where they exchange those books. And in this chart, you'll see the transit times. So these are the transit times that the courier has committed to hitting. I will say with that this is one of our biggest challenges that we face is hitting these transit times and also tracking if the courier is hitting these transit times. Some of it, like I said, has to do with the number of delivery days you have. If you're expecting something in 24 hours, but you're not getting delivery for 2 more days, that's obviously not going to happen. So that has changed the way things have worked over the last few years and how quickly things are getting places. But in order to, we don't have a good, we don't currently have a good way to track that. So it's something that I try to work closely with the libraries to find a way to gauge that. And I will ask locations to report information to me. And I always say, like, the more information I have, the better. I'm not out there. So if you're not receiving things in a timely manner, I need to know. So don't ever be afraid to reach out and report that information, because I don't know what's happening unless someone tells me. We are looking at finding some ways to spot check problem areas, things like tracking devices where we would put those in shipments occasionally to see where a holdup is or how quickly things are getting places, and also what some delivery services in different areas of the country have done is just a sort of manual reporting, like you put a note in a bag when it goes out, and when it gets there, you report to me the number of days it took to get there. It's kind of tedious, but we've looked at tracking systems in the past, and it's just the workload and the time it puts on the libraries and the courier. It's just not worth the information we'll get from it. So there's more to come on that, hopefully later this year. Moving into service standards. So these are the service standards that the couriers have committed to. And also touch on what we ask of ELD members in a bit. But they include transit times, which we looked at, which should be between 24 and 72 hours. Delivery days, drivers deliver on the set days of the week. They can't just take it upon themselves to come different days to your location. So they're committed to the days that we told them that you would like delivery, and a consistent delivery times. We ask the courier to give a 2-hour window, and obviously things happen, traffic accidents and that, but to try to have the drivers come within that window so you know when to expect them and you know when there's an issue and they're haven't been there yet. As they have their standards, we also ask members to follow certain standards, and the most important one being clear labeling, which I'll give you an example of. Sure. Member resources. So the members also have access to a number of resources, and most of you on ELD are probably familiar with these, but just to run through them quickly, there's a policy and procedures manual, which has all the information about using ELD in it. The member roster, which is the most widely used, I would say probably, document, because it gives you your current list of locations, addresses, and hubs. There's also an introduction training guide for new members that goes through all this information as well. Labeling requirements and a label maker system.
Maria, it looks
Yeah.
like we can't see your screen anymore. Oh, there it is. Never mind.
Oh,
Nope,
that's
all
weird.
set. Yeah, it was just for a moment. Thanks.
Thank you. And a number of forms that members use to report things like their statistics, missing resources and claims, bag requests and issues. And just running through one of the documents I spoke of, the policies and procedures manual explains the responsibilities of Empire Library Delivery, the courier, and the members. So it runs through what we all need to do to make it successful, not just the courier, but also what I'm responsible for, what Esm's responsible for, and the members. This is sent out to all locations in April when we send out for our renewals. And it's also available on the website. This also includes information on, like I ran through before, the labeling, statistics, closure reporting, and all that other stuff that we need to daily to report things that are going on. The introduction and training guide that I spoke about, this is just additional information on that. New members and staff can use this just to get additional information on where they can find things. And additional tools that are provided to members are when you sign up for Empire Library Delivery, you'll get a supply of blue bags, which we use to ship all the items. And you request those as needed, but you'll get an initial, an initial supply of those to use. We ask that all things be shipped in these bags. It's really the best way for things not to get misplaced, because the people sorting in the hubs know that the blue bags mean that they're ELD bags. There's also a system, like I mentioned, for creating labels. You don't have to use this, but it's an easy way to have all the addresses pre-populated for you. So, as I mentioned, this isn't just what the courier needs to do, but also what we need to do to make them successful. The number one thing I would say is labeling. If you've heard these ELD presentations before, we kind of always hammer that home, that we need to have correct address labels, or the items are not going to get to where they're going. The turnover in the hubs, although sometimes we have some long-term employees, we often have new people, and if it doesn't have all the information on it, it's sometimes just set aside. So a label, if you're not using the label maker, needs to have the institution name and symbol, the full address, and the hub of the receiving location, as well as the return address. The important thing I want to mention about the label maker, and one of the bigger issues we've had, is it requires you to put in the hub of the hub of the location. And often we have people putting their hub and not the receiving location. So it's really important that you put the hub of the location that you're sending it to. That's what they use to sort an item, to say, hey, this is leaving New York City, it's going to Syracuse. If you put New York City on it, it's going to put back in the New York City pile. So that's a really important point and thing that members can do to make sure things get to where they're going as quickly as possible. Also, I know on the library side, there's often student workers, and explaining this process to them is very important, as well as sharing the roster with them. Another one of the biggest things that holds shipments up is sending books out with labels that are for libraries that are not in New York State, or libraries that have discontinued service or were never on the service. So oftentimes we get things for, say, California or Hawaii. The courier, although they've been told to send that back to the sender, they don't, and that item sits there. So, a good way is just to make sure your labels are accurate and that they're current members only being sent to. And obviously, things happen, and sometimes something gets thrown in the wrong pile, but it's important to check those outgoing shipments. Other things that you can do is designate a clear spot for deliveries and pickups so the driver knows where to go every day. Report closures a week in advance so we can get that on their schedule, and report issues with deliveries, including missed stops or driver issues, and either damaged or missing items. Like I mentioned before, if I don't know about it or you're telling me a few months later, I can't address the issue. So the more information you get me, the better. And lastly, reporting monthly statistics. We obviously want to know how much is moving through the system. So it's very important that libraries report to us every month how much we ask them to report how much is being sent out from a location each month. So a form will go out to you that you can report that back monthly. So looking ahead, just a few things for the upcoming year. The contract with the current courier does extend through 2025-26 fiscal year, so that's till July 2026. The pricing and commitment letters for the number of days of service for the upcoming year will be sent out by April 1st. So each year we do send out a commitment letter to the libraries asking them, do you want to remain at the number of days? And if so, is it the same number of days a week or Tuesday, Thursday? And then also committing to the things that I mentioned before, like you will submit your statistics and that you've reviewed the policies and procedures. In the upcoming year, with direction from the advisory board, I'll continue to work with the courier to improve service. My main focus being on those transit times and the potential use of tracking devices or manual tracking. I think we're at a point where a lot of issues we've seen in the past have been resolved, and this is one piece that if we can get things moving or to you guys faster and get to that standard transit time that the courier committed to, that would be a huge win for everybody. And toward the end of this term, the advisory board will assess the courier's performance, and then and we're talking down the road in 2026 now, and discuss if we're going to go back to bid for a new courier service. The new agreement obviously being aiming at improving the service and keeping the cost as low to you all. We know everyone's talking about budget costs, so along with providing good service, we also need to make sure we're keeping that cost as low as we possibly can for you. And that's all I have. I can pull up, I could pull up some of the documents for you, but it's probably easier to review on your own in the links that are provided in the presentation. that Christine and Sophie would be sending out. But please feel free to reach out to me at any time. Like I said, I welcome any questions or feedback or things that you feel we can be doing better. So please reach out at any time. And thank you all.
Thank you so much, Maria. We really appreciate that update. And we actually have a couple of questions for you. The first one is, do you ever provide training sessions for ELD, whether those are in person or virtual live sessions or recordings?
Well, let me get it back on camera. You know what, we did that in the past, and it was something I was actually thinking about over the past few days, that we could do that again, because I know that there's a lot of turnover in student workers. That's kind of where the training manual came from. But I was thinking about starting that back up again with the renewals, having kind of like either a training session or an open forum which we kind of did during the pandemic, where people can just jump on and ask any questions that they have. Because sometimes it is hard going back and forth through email.
Yeah,
So yeah,
like a Q&A type of thing.
Yeah. Or even just a training walk through all the different forms and things.
Yeah. Like you said, there is a lot of turnover, and that guide looks great. Some people benefit from doing things on their own, and others, may need some kind of hands-on guidance. So that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Something that might be available.
I didn't want to, pull that up and go through the whole thing on this, but I'd be happy to with a smaller group of people.
Okay, great. Thank you. The second question, should all questions on ELD go to you, or are there other contacts that people should be reaching out to? If they email the admin, is that kind of just like the general?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have the admin general box. There's a number of obviously other people at Eslin that have access to that. So if for some reason I wasn't able to answer it, that somebody else could. But that's the main point of contact for any questions. And then there's some of the forms are specific to, if you have a missed stop, most people know that's where they go to, and they put that form in, because then that way it all goes to one spot. But anything outside of that can just go to the admin at Eslin.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. And I'm going to drop that contact information into the chat too, just in case that's easier for folks to copy and paste. And as Maria said, the slides from her presentation will be available at the end here. And Christine, I think you have one other question as well.
Yes, you mentioned that you use courier services. Which ones do you use, or which one?
There's two. Custom Courier Solutions handles upstate, and New York City is handled by BARC. And they've been, I've been here 7 years. They've been here much longer. I don't know the exact number of years, but we have looked at our other courier systems in the past and gone out to bid, and but we're still with those two at this time.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks again for the update. We really appreciate it. I think it's a good note to end on, with some practical information for our group that I think is probably useful to a lot of us. And I just want to.
And it's all on the. Sorry, just wanted.
No, you're good. Please.
All on the website as well. As you guys know, we just moved over to a new website, so there are a couple of things that may be missing, but we're working on that. So if you don't see something there, just reach out to me.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, the new website is looking really good. Anybody who hasn't checked it out should definitely go over and look at it. It's quite different from the old website. Well, thank you again, and thanks again to all of our presenters for sharing your expertise and experience with us today. The resource sharing virtual conference would not be possible without you, that's for sure. On behalf of CLRC and SCLRC, I also want to take a moment to thank all of our attendees for being here today. It's wonderful to have a virtual room full of resource sharing practitioners with diverse job titles and responsibilities from across the state of New York. It's really rare that we're able to bring a group of folks who do resource sharing together in one space, and we're really grateful for your presence and participation. And lastly, I'd like to thank my co-chair and co-host Christine for being an awesome partner in planning and executing this conference. As the new librarian on the block, I thank you for leading the way. With that, you can find the slides from our presenters in the link on the screen that Christine will share in a moment. We will also send those out tomorrow along with folks' contact information in case you didn't catch it in the chat or on individual people's slides. And the recording of the conference will be sent out next week and posted to both CLRC and SCLRC's websites. I'm also going to put out a pitch for taking a few minutes to fill out our evaluation survey, which I'll drop in the chat and which will also be available on the slide that Christine will share after I'm done speaking. It's really helpful to receive feedback from our participants so we know what to do more of and less of for next year's resource sharing mini conference. And we will send that out along with the slides and contact info as well. Have a great evening, everyone. We'll stick around here, at least Christine and I will, for another 5-10 minutes if folks have any questions or have any comments they want to make. So thank you all so much again and have a good one.